All right. Welcome to this opening lecture on presenting, public speaking, some of the public speaking basics that we're trying to master. And just to kind of set the stage here, we can think about public speaking as something that you do in a large auditorium with a large number of people listening. But I also want you to think about public speaking as just what does it take to get up in some kind of public forum, or even just with a few other individuals in a room, and express what you're thinking in a way that's compelling, cogent, and convincing. That's a skill that's extremely useful in a wide variety of situations, and it's worth your time to get a little bit better at it. So that's kind of our mission with this. So what we're going to do with the lecture, we're going to do two things. I'm going to give you some things that I want you to think about as you're working on your projects when you're presenting something. And two, I'm just going to give you some examples of, I think, what effective public speaking looks like. Okay, so we're going to start off with just two public speakers. One is a politician and giving a public speak, and one is a famous Facebook executive speaking at commencement, a graduation ceremony. There's the link here if you want to see the whole things, but I'm just going to have you listen to a few short snippets of each and have you think about what was effective about the way they were speaking. Okay.
Whenever or wherever a few seek to threaten those who look, dress, or pray differently, many others stand up and say, no, not here, not in our community, not to our neighbors.
So I'll just point out that he's pausing after some words for effect, and in general, he's not in a rush. So he's talking at a deliberate speed that lets his words have some impact.
Today is a day of celebration, a day to celebrate all the hard work that got you to this moment. Today is a day of thanks, a day to thank all the people who helped you get here, the people who taught you and nurtured you, cheered you on, and dried you tears. Because today marks the end of one era of your life and the beginning of something new.
So again, not going too fast. And you'll notice she's using pretty simple words and pretty simple sentence structure. But she's also, both speakers are conveying a certain kind of warmth and certain kind of genuineness that makes him a voice, a speech that you want to listen to. Okay, so just want to start off by really talking about the speed that you're talking at, because it's really easy to fall into habits where we rush that. Okay, so getting started on the presentation. Again, your goal is effective communication. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you want to recognize there is a difference from informal interactions. And I will throw out that this is one of those things that if you haven't thought about, there's a good chance that you think you're communicating effectively and you really are not moving into the mode that you need to move into to be effective in a public speaking sort of way. There's a tendency for us to just talk as we usually talk, and it might be kind of fast, or it might be, I might kind of make some asides, or I might just gesture a lot, or might not think about my words that carefully. That's fine for an informal conversation, but if you're really trying to get a point across, you kind of move into a different mode. So the first thing to do to make that happen is you need to prepare. So it may not look like it, but I spent a long time getting this lecture ready. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how to sequence things. So the purpose of an outline is not only to set up what the presentation is going to be, but it gives you a way to kind of think through the pieces and how they might relate to one another. So always start with an outline because it's a more flexible framework where you can kind of move stuff around and think about what order that you want to talk about stuff in. And then kind of practice going through the outline and how long it would take to talk about the specific things. it's very common for us to find when we start talking about something that we know well and we're trying to unpack it, that it takes longer than we thought it would because we kind of underestimate our expert knowledge of that subject. So practice going through the outline, revise the outline as needed, and don't be afraid to cut stuff. The other thing is you don't want to just read it. If possible, you want your presentation to have the feel of a conversation where it's not stiff and it's flexible and you're engaging your audience. Okay, and then as both of those speakers I think showed, you want to try to convey some warmth. It doesn't need to be over the top syrupy, but you kind of want to show that you're present and you're trying to give something valuable to the people that are listening. And the other trick there is if you're thinking about your audience, you're less likely to get inside your head and be worrying about how you look or sound or getting nervous about that kind of stuff. Okay, so some delivery tips. In this first lecture, I'm trying to keep it very basic and not give you too much you have to think about. And I think 4 things are a good place to start here. So 1, you really want to make sure that you're projecting. So if you're in person, you want to make sure that that person in the last back part of the room can hear you. And it's good to check and just ask, can everyone hear me? That makes the audience feel like you care, and it's also a chance for them to tell you if there's a problem. We'll talk about this in a second, but if you're doing this with technology, you want to check and make sure that the audio volume is set at the right level, and that anything that's going to get in the way tech-wise that you figured out. Okay, so there's the projecting. It has to do with volume, but it's a little more than that. It has to do with the air support that you bring to it. Okay, the second thing we've already talked about is pace. You want to make sure that you're speaking slowly, deliberately, and that you're not rushed. So I have a picture of a sea turtle here for you to inspire you to think about how you're moving through that space. You're going someplace, but you're not in a rush. You're kind of moving at a comfortable sea turtle pace. Third thing is pronunciation. I can't tell you what a big difference this makes if you don't drop consonants at the ends of words. And we'll do a little work on here that in a second. But this concept goes by a number of things. Some people talk about diction, some people talk about articulation, enunciation, but it's making each of the sounds in your words heard by your audience. And then just to talk about the dark side for a second, it's very easy to fall into these 3 traps. 1, you're not projecting, so kind of err on the side of being too loud. 2, there's a tendency for us to rush. And 3, there's a tendency for people to mumble. The last thing I want to say is you want to spend a little bit of time just imagining yourself doing a good job. So elite athletes will imagine themselves running through their routine and hitting all their marks. You could do that with a speech too, and it builds some confidence and also gives you some mental rehearsal of what's going on. Okay. So at this point, I want you to listen to 2 really short lectures that talk about enunciation, that pronunciation thing. So what I want you to do is stop listening to this video and go to the YouTube channel, and you're going to listen to these 2 other speakers. So the first one, if you just listen to how she talks, she gives you a really good example of enunciation, and she's also somebody that's very engaging. So I think you could pick up some tips there. And then she gives this little exercise that really will help you think through the importance of enunciating certain words. And so that's that 205 to 305. And then for the second guy here, you can just listen through the whole thing. One neat thing is he's distinguishing between what an accent is and what clear pronunciation is. And he's making the point that you can have an accent. That doesn't affect how well you enunciate. But he gives you a little exercise in the middle of it to show you the importance of not dropping consonants. So consonants, where your tongue hits your comes to a stopping point, unlike vowels, those tend to be things when we're rushing that we don't bring the tongue fully in contact with the mouth, and then we just have this blur of sound. So stop it here and watch these two. I have the links here, but they're in the class YouTube channel, so you can find them there. Okay, so just to recap what you saw there, I think one thing I like about this is this woman is talking about how to engage really young kids. Oftentimes, people that teach really young kids have some techniques that work well for older people too. Teaching kids is hard, so if they've got a technique that works well with kids, there's a chance it'll work well for you too. So that's a little game she does, but just think about how the game focuses you on certain words that are easy to get twisted, and it really encourages you to enunciate clearly. And then our Australian friend, think about how he's really emphasizing that not dropping the consonants, fully hitting all the different phonemes in a word makes a big difference. And he's suggesting that's something you can practice, which I think is, along with flossing, something you could do every day. Okay, and then I have here just two real-world examples. These are cases where people aren't giving speeches, but they're engaged in a kind of public discourse where they're being recorded and they want to be taken seriously. And you'll notice in both of these cases, there's places where the people rush a little bit, but you'll notice that they pause on certain words, and that pausing or emphasizing certain words kind of lets the audience mentally catch up, and they don't lose their audience. So they're both very effective in a different sort of way. All right, so see what you think here. This is from a PBS NewsHour show. They're talking about gun laws, and I want you to contrast the two different speakers here. I would say the first guy is not a bad public speaker, but notice how the second guy is better about grabbing certain words and pausing to really put a point on what he's trying to get across.
The identity of conservatism has become gods and guns, or borders, bullets, and babies, as one candidate said it. And so supporting guns has become almost a talisman, of sort of a visual signature for Republicans, what T.S. Eliot used to call an objective correlative, like the visual thing to symbolizing the entire philosophy. And so I think what President said was compelling, but I don't think the Republican Party, if anything, they're moving in a very, very different direction.
I mean, Jonathan, and so he's not going to allow anything to happen. Do you have any hope that this set of latest tragedies is going to do anything?
I mean, I always have hope, but I'm a realist. We've been here before, too many times before. The fact that Senator Murphy is sitting with a bipartisan group of senators and they're talking, that's a good thing. I want them to talk. But I have no faith that they will get to a point where they will have a press conference where they announce, here's our framework, here's our bill, here's our language, here are the items that we are calling for, and then to actually get that piece of legislation to a vote that breaks a filibuster. I mean, I've just laid out about 3 or 4 hurdles right there. If the slaughter of babies at Newtown Elementary School, or Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, 10 years ago in December, wasn't enough to move the debate to the point where we're talking about gun safety laws, or the murder of high school students at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. If that then wasn't enough, then why should anyone expect the murder of 10 grade schoolers in Uvalde, Texas, to move this conversation? It pains me to have to say that, but I've seen this horrible Groundhog Day movie too many times, and I've heard the yeah out of Mitch McConnell too many times to believe that the action and the things that Senator Murphy is pouring his heart and soul into, I don't doubt his sincerity. He is absolutely sincere. I do doubt the sincerity of the people around that table, that they actually want to get something done.
Okay, so I'll just point out that, again, first guy does fine, very famous. David Brooks is a very famous guy. But there's something about the second guy here that is just, he's very he's putting a lot of effort into picking certain words and really making a point that is trying to be compelling. Okay, so another real life example. These are two people on another PBS show, news show, talking about white nationalism. And this is a scholar about trying to understand how white nationalism can lead to violence. And then you have Michelle Martin, who is most known for working on NPR. She's a host. But you'll notice she speaks pretty quickly, but she's still able to make sure that you hear each word. And there's a certain richness in her voice that really grabs your attention. So again, I want to show you the difference between somebody that's doing a fine job and somebody I think that's really gifted in terms of the way that they're able to use language. Okay, let me get this going.
We shouldn't think of this as white nationalism the way that people think of sort of overzealous patriotism. This is a profoundly a profoundly anti-American movement. And it poses real threats to democracy and to American people.
What do you make of the increasing identification of the Republican Party with elements of this movement? I mean, according to a poll by the American Enterprise Institute, the poll found that nearly 40% of Republicans think political violence is justifiable and could be necessary. We find that a majority in some places in some polls, a majority of Republicans are adopting this falsehood that the election was stolen from the former president, Donald Trump. And then, in fact, we see that the party apparatus in a number of states have been taken over by people who have adopted this falsehood. So what do you make of that?
Absolutely. And the same problem as the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and Adam Waffen and the base. All of that is the same groundswell. We should be thinking about it only with degrees of difference. We shouldn't be treating them as different stories.
But yet we find that these governmental entities, particularly at the state and local level, which are dominated by Republicans, are obsessed with Black Lives Matter, Antifa, whatever that is, or whatever they think it is, and critical race theory. What we see is this groundswell of concern about the teaching of alternate narratives around the presence of African Americans in the society, who are, if I may remind us, 13% of the population. What's that about? What's that about?
The United States is sort of alone in how little we as a public have grappled with that history that we descend from. And this doesn't need to be about American and un-American. This is about the story that we all come from. It's a matter of basic truth finding.
Okay, Professor Blue, I respect that this is the work of your life. I respect that it is greatly important. But I as I'm sitting here 15 miles from where I live, hundreds of armed people assaulted the Capitol with the intention of overthrowing an election, and then who knows what else. So forgive me if I'm having a little trouble with the concept that a better teaching of history right now is going to address a...
So we...
Okay, so I think you can see what I'm talking about. Michelle Martin here, she's not giving a public speech, but she's engaging somebody for an audience, and the way she hits certain words is very powerful. And there's also a fun dynamic where this is an academic historian that's saying the solution to white nationalism is better history, And Michelle Martin says, "Look, girlfriend, I live in the Capitol, and the Proud Boys were like 15 miles from my home trying to destroy the city. We might need more than a history lesson." But anyway, that's a different story. But the point is, this is not like giving a formal corporate talk, but it's just effective public discourse where it's easy for you to be understood and you're able to make your points. Okay, I hope that was helpful. By this point, I've given you several examples of what I think are examples of effective public speaking. And let's just review the 4 things we were trying to focus on. So 1, make sure that you can be heard, that you're projecting. That's in part volume, but it's also speaking with enough lung support that your words don't trail off at the end and that you fill the whole space with that sound. Second, the pace, speaking slowly, deliberately, not being rushed. That will help, of course, with pronunciation, where you're trying to articulate, hit all those consonants, not dropping consonants. That makes a big difference. And then remembering to pause. It doesn't need to be a long pause, but there's a thing about hitting certain words and varying the pace to give emphasis to what you want people to pay attention to. So you can get better at this. I encourage you to work at it. The most important thing for your assignment is to record it, listen to it, think about what you could do better, and then try it again. But like a lot of things, it involves listening, thinking, and then repeating and practicing until it gets better. All right. Got some boring notes here, and then I'll close on something a little more exciting. But the tech stuff, remember, before you dig into the hard work, make sure you're comfortable with the technology so that doesn't mess you up at the end. Kind of figure out how Loom works and take a few practice runs to check the volume, check your lighting, that sort of thing. Practice and check your time. Make sure your time's where it needs to be. Get some other people to listen to you. That helps a lot. Oftentimes, other folks can hear things that we miss. And then practice. It's like anything. If you do a few drafts, get it better, and then use one of the later ones, it's going to be a process you learn more from than if you just give it a shot and turn that in. There's a handout I have here that just has some more good tips from a website. Encourage you to look at that. All right, and then the last thing I'll say is just trying to step back a little. But speaking is really how we connect with one another. So I think writing is hugely important and a skill that you need to work on as well. But speaking is kind of where language lives, and it's the way we connect with one another. So one thing I want you to think about doing is in developing some effective speaking skills. You're really finding your voice. You're really trying to talk in a way that is expressing who you are. So if you think of some people that are really powerful public speakers, like maybe your Oprah or Obama or some of the folks we listened to today, but they have an ability to be more than they were beforehand by cultivating a certain kind of voice and a way of talking that lets them really connect with other people. So think about the power of that. Okay, so just remember some of the examples that we looked through today, and encourage you to find your voice. I think you can do it. And I hope you enjoy the assignment. Okay, thank you so much. Take care.